Hi and welcome back to another video, also follow up for the 7900 XTX cooler vapor chamber drama thing. I already talked about this briefly in the previous video that I didn't have enough time to open up the vapor chamber, but that's what we are trying to do today. I also didn't open up a 7900 XTX vapor chamber yet. I'm not an expert in this field anyway. If you want to get some basic info about vapor chambers, there was a great video from Gamers Nexus about the 4090 with NVIDIA. And there you can get an impression of how a vapor chamber works internally and that it has like internal structure. So it's not like just two sheets and you can cut open the side and it will fall apart. So it should be a bit more complex. Luckily, we have a CNC mill, so that should definitely help us, but I just guess it will be a trial and error thing. Just cut it open and see what we can find. At Grizzly, we have our Datron M8 Cube milling machine, and we equipped it with a 6mm end mill. And with manual mode, we just carefully cut inside the vapor chamber. And at this time, honestly, I had no idea how this would look internally. I just knew that from measurements, the vapor chamber has a total thickness of 3.0mm. And the estimate from me was that the sides or the material thickness of each side should be somewhere between like 0.5 to maybe 1mm. Generally speaking, vapor chambers in our segment, like the normal PC cooling segment, are typically made out of copper, and just for visually purpose, they are, at least in this case, should be black powder coated. And in 0.2mm steps, we decided to cut through the material step by step to see how far or how deep we can go. And after 1.0mm, we could see some kind of circles on the surface. And we thought that these must be the inner struts, like the additional structure to give the vapor chamber more stability, because with a lower internal pressure, otherwise, if it wouldn't have additional structure inside, it would just collapse. So we knew there shouldn't be a lot left, and after another 0.2mm, we could see that the surface is slowly going away. On the first look, we saw a very fine structure like a net or like a mesh, and with a distance of 1 centimeter to each other, we saw those struts or like those things to give the vapor chamber more stability. Then we continued to add one more groove next to it because we wanted to leave one part of the surface intact, just to get an estimate or also figure out if both internal surfaces of the vapor chamber are equipped with the same type of mesh. And with a little bit of force, like a screwdriver and pliers, we were able to peel this off. We will look at this in more detail in a bit. Continuing with the GPU area, how is the heat dissipated in here? And will we find the same kind of mesh or structure that we saw around, or maybe more? That's why we cut another groove right around the entire GPU area, because we wanted to remove this surface in exactly the same way. But at least in the groove, it looked exactly in the area previously. And again, because there is a solid connection between both surfaces, we had to use a little bit of violence to remove both surfaces from each other. So use some pliers again, some screwdrivers to just peel it off. And you can see again those struts for additional structure or like support, but these seem to be surrounded by additional material. And you can see that some of this just breaks apart while removing the surface. And the way it looks very brittle, then you already know this has to be some kind of copper sinter material. While removing the GPU cooling part, like this cold plate area, I also noticed that the mesh seemed to be still wet. You can see some kind of moisture still left on my thumb, and at least I couldn't smell anything, and just from the viscosity and everything, this could just very well be normal water. And inspecting the surface or this piece further, we can see again there is some mesh or like net involved, and the bottom one, well, there are two stacked ones, and the one on the bottom seems to be the same one as we saw before, and then on top there seems to be one that's a little bit finer than before. Then again, we decided to mill off additional parts in the bottom and on top of the vapor chamber just to see if we can spot anything unusual. The like small black pieces you can find in there should be residues from the milling process. I don't think they were in there before. And after some cleaning, we could also spot additional fluid escaping the vapor chamber. So there was definitely a lot of fluid inside, but with this kind of method, like just milling this open, obviously it's absolutely not possible to track or to measure how much fluid was actually inside. And here we have the entire cooler, aka vapor chamber, with the 4 opened areas. We started with this area simply because I thought this must be kind of the most unnecessary area. Then also started opening the end parts on the left and also the end part on the right. Also on the right side you can see this small thing on the bottom, which can be used, I guess, for making the internal pressure, to decrease the internal pressure, to fit the boiling point of the fluid, which probably is water, I'm not quite sure about, but at least just from looking at these areas, I could not spot anything unusual. The mesh which we have everywhere looks fine in all the locations, but honestly speaking, I was surprised that we have mesh in general, simply because, at least judging from heat pipes, there are 3 different types of heat pipes. One is grooved, one is mesh, and one is sintered. The sintered heat pipes are using the same material which we have on those studs right here, but they're using this as like the inner mesh material. Whereas here we just have this normal net or mesh, which at least on heat pipes is only used for like mid-performance heat pipes or mid-quality heat pipes. And whenever you want to fight gravity and when you want to go for full out high performance, then all heat pipes are always using this kind of sinter material. So I was a bit surprised to find this, but again, I'm not an expert on this field, so yeah, this is also just some speculation from my side. And then one more thing I noticed is that apart from the center support rods, all the others, like in this area or here, they don't allow water to flow back on the other side. So that was something I did not expect. So generally speaking, the way it works is that you have water in there and then you have the GPU contact surface area, and whenever this gets warm, the water on the other side, on this net or mesh, will evaporate. And then the vapor will condense on like all the other side, like on here, on this mesh. And then the water would flow back to this area, to the sinter material, and then be transferred back to the GPU contact surface. But I was surprised that it's only the center area that allows the water to flow back, and all the other support rods, they don't have sinter on the side or like a mesh on the side, so they don't allow water to flow back, or maybe just in a very small portion. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, maybe there's an expert out there that can comment on this, but just judging from this, it surprised me that there is only a very limited amount of like rods that can transfer the condensed water back from one side to the other side. In these images, we can see this even more clearly. We have a very even and relatively fine mesh on the entire surface, but in the area of the individual studs or around the studs themselves, those support rods, there is no mesh or other sinter material. I'm not quite sure if it's possible for water to travel across this or if this is even relevant. I'm totally not sure about this. And on the cutout, which is on the opposite side of the vapor chamber, also on the internal side of the vapor chamber, we have the exact identical mesh, again without sinter material. Interestingly though, it looks like those studs are pressed into the mesh, like there is no cutout into the mesh. And the same appears to be on the opposite side, where you can still see some of those support rods, and on top there are some residues of the mesh which we ripped out. In the GPU area we have those 9 additional rods with the copper sinter material that is for transfer of the water from one surface to the other surface. Due to the very fine structure, this allows with capillary effect for the water to travel from one surface to the other, and thus to vaporize on the GPU contact area. Again, also here there is nothing unusual I could spot. All the damages are expected from our special treatment. One more high resolution picture at the end, which is showing the backside of the GPU cold plate, which is showing the stacked mesh, the fine one and the rather rough one. And also it shows some of these areas where those support rods are like connected with the sinter material. I'm shooting this video Monday evening close to midnight, and ComputerBase also wrote an article. They are a German media, and they also created a poll within their community to check how many people are affected. At this time, 223 people participated and about a quarter is affected. I think that people who are affected are more likely to participate, but generally speaking, seems at least to be higher than with NVIDIA with the 0.04%. From all information I could gather from today, I would assume that there is no construction error in the entire vapor chamber. It all looks kind of fine to me. As I said before, I'm not an expert on this field, so I can just judge from my basic knowledge about heat pipes and vapor chambers, but just looking at this, it seems fine. So then again, I also checked with Igor, who then got also in contact with a vapor chamber vendor. And from their expectation or from their knowledge, looking at this, they assume that there is simply not enough fluid inside the vapor chamber, which is also what we estimated in the previous video when we did the flip test. So it all in the end seems to be a few milliliters of water missing, a few very expensive milliliters of water for AMD. That's probably it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and in the next days we will get back to some NVIDIA cars. See you soon. Bye bye.